Hello and welcome. I'm Shannon Elizabeth Eastman, and you are listening to the Work That Matters podcast. These are conversations that take place at the intersection of personal and business growth. I am having this conversation from my office in Rathmines. I've just heard a few workers outside and I'm going to keep going anyway. I'm in Dublin, Ireland, so that's just a few minutes down from the canal. It is July 2020. I'm not going to say anything more about that. And today I am joined by Justin Robinson. Justin is joining me from Vancouver, British Columbia, in my country, Canada. Justin is a dear friend of mine. I've known him for well over 30 years. I have watched his development. I have seen his transformations, and I am not timid in any way to say that this man is an overachiever. He would probably disagree with me. Justin is a coach. He is mindfulness leader. He's a vice president of leadership and innovation for the Design House Collective, one of the coolest consultancies I've ever come across. He spearheads design thinking and creative strategy development. Justin runs, so he created and he runs a quantum church. Those things take place on Sunday, exploring quantum biology, quantum sociology, and all the wonderful things that come with that. Justin began his career in advertising. He was working for Fortune 100 clients when he was scooped up by a really sexy energy outfit, and he spearheaded so many things there. I think they had 6 or 7 milestones, and Justin came in when they had about 10 employees, left when they had about 200 employees, and looked after brand and culture and reputation. He's got a wealth of experience that he pulls from, not to mention his time in South America studying with shamans, his meditation practice, 2 hours a day for 6 months. He's done some really interesting things. So this conversation it's about leadership inside meta crisis. We look at some really interesting things in this conversation. And I will say that the first 10 or 15 minutes will require you to be grounded and centered as we talk about the state of the world right now and what's happening. It can be a little discombobulating. So take a few deep breaths, center yourself, and it gets better. I'll tell you that. So if you're looking for more information about Justin, there are some links in the bio. The blog is going to have all of his contact information and a couple of articles that Justin has penned that we'd like to share with you. So without further ado, I'm going to let you in on the conversation that I hope you will enjoy. And I hope it is my intention for you that it shifts your perspective on what's possible for you now. Welcome to the show, Justin. I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. It's so good to be here.
You are looking so well.
Thank you.
We are talking about leadership today. And this particular conversation, I am wanting it to be about your journey and your perspective and your experience. You have done some incredible things in the last few years, never mind the last 30 odd. We usually start by analyzing a typical construct or a belief or a quote that exists in and around the area of leadership, like leaders eat last or something to that effect. And I don't know if you have something off top of mind, because if you don't, we can jump right into my questions.
Well, let's talk about a concept, which is we are in a moment on the planet, I think, and maybe humanity has always thought that it's in a moment. Like, I'm sure that people that were alive during the scientific revolution or the Renaissance, or, that were, people that were alive in ancient Greece, maybe they thought that was the moment. But for humanity right now, I think there's something very, very unique and very potent and also very risky about this moment for humanity. And so some of my colleagues that I've worked with in my, people that are part of the discourse community that I'm part of, like to refer to this moment not as a crisis, but actually as a meta crisis for humanity. Why? Because in this particular time, first of all, this is the only time in history that every civilization on the planet, every culture, East and West, and everywhere in the world, we are totally connected since the turn of the century into a global conversation where we can actually talk for the first time about what is the human species. And it's actually like we're in a crisis of we don't know what we are. It's like we are in the midst of what Zach Stein calls a species-wide identity crisis for the first time in history. And it's true that we've never known what this species is about. We've never known who we are, what we're going to become, or why this thing is happening called humanity. But for the first time now, we're actually capable in a species-wide sense of having that conversation. And it's confronting us that we don't know who we are or what we're about. Now, that's not the meta crisis. That's a crisis of identity, which is interlocked with a crisis of potentially climate, major changes and disasters in climate. There's a crisis of political corruption. There's a crisis of being overwhelmed by information and disinformation and not being able to parse out what is true, who should I believe, what are the experts that are actually interested in my well-being as a human being. So we've got a crisis of meaning and information, a crisis of identity for the species, a crisis of ecology and climate and environment. We've got economic crises and inequality and concern about markets. There is a lot going on at this moment that we've never had to navigate before as a species. And leadership of a different level, of a different manifestation, of a different kind than we've ever seen before is going to be what's required to help us navigate through it, if that's even possible.
So, first of all, my hair is standing up. This is a really intense and powerful exchange. And as you're sharing meaning and info and identity and ecology and environmental and economic, all from the perspective of crises, I can't help but agree with you. It's July. It's month 7 of whatever.
I forgot to mention COVID.
I know. But I want to talk to you about meta-crisis. I want to talk to you about leadership. Could you define meta-crisis for me? Because whilst I appreciate meta and crisis, I'm new to the word being used together. How would you articulate or define it?
Yeah. So meta-crisis, if you wanted to sort of break down meta, you might think of it as like a crisis of crises that are all interlocking and dynamically entangled with each other and co-evolving. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole. If you do something to fix climate, you're going to have issues popping up over here to do with democracy and truth and economics or whatever, right? So the whole thing is like this massively interlocking, dynamic, moving beast of many, many different parts. And none of them are separate. And not only is it that none of it separate, it's that we as human beings don't even have the ability to see what it is. It's beyond our comprehension. And that's what I think makes it a meta-crisis and not just a crisis.
So that's a meta-crisis is a small word with a lot of impact.
Yeah.
And as I sit here centering myself and becoming more grounded in this conversation, this idea about a new form of leadership, a new expression of leadership that can sit inside what is a meta-crisis, a crisis of crises, and lead.
Right.
Where does that start? And what does that look like? And how do we get there?
Well, this might be part of the opportunity of the meta-crisis, right? Because it's as if everything we've just talked about, all of the, COVID and, economic disruption and, racial tension.
We could just shorthand it and call it 2020.
Yeah, 2020 and everything that's led up to this moment. It's as if all of that is staring us down and we don't know how to get through it. So as leaders, the standard definition of leadership in the past has been a leader is a strong, person with a clear vision that points out the direction and everyone gets behind and rows in the same direction. You can't lead like that if we don't know where the hell we're supposed to be going and how to get through this. It's not that type of leadership that's required. It's actually asking us to step into the unknown. And that's a sort of a different quality of a leader than maybe what a lot of people hold in their minds as the stereotypical leader.
Well, immediately there's a contrast and comparison that shows up, and correct me if I'm taking this in an angle that's not resonant with leadership inside Metacrisis. But there has been a significant need for leaders who lead from what is the head, very clarity and strategy, and we're going to all follow in this direction and we're moving along this trajectory. And then there's this leadership from the heart. And we've seen what that looks like. And there's been experiences of that, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years where that's shown up. And now and in some cases, there's a synthesis of head and heart in and around leadership. And we could probably think of some famous ones right now. But I wonder if this type of leadership, when you talk about the unknown, I think of Jungian psychology, I think of the abyss, I think of Osho, I think of all these, great minds who talk about staring into the unknown and letting it devour you, which is of the soul. It's a soul. So leadership, leading from within, leading from the soul, is what's starting to come up as just a contrast from, you've got head and heart leaders, and then you've got, we need to label it so we can keep the conversation going. What is essence or soul level leadership, which is completely unknown and abyss for most humans walking the planet today. Thoughts?
Yeah, I love that, to stare into is that what you said, to stare into the unknown and allow it to devour you?
Yes.
I think that's one metaphor or one way of thinking about what this is really, this moment that we're in. It's like both individually and collectively, as
simultaneously, we are experiencing this at a micro and a macro level.
Totally.
It's the first time in my existence, being on this planet. I was talking to someone, let's say in the last 6 weeks, saying, has there ever been a time in your existence here where you've had something even close? And the only reference, which I imagine you're already guessing what it is 9/11. And this outshadows that. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I do think this really is a moment for humanity, and it is calling us. Like, literally, if we just feel into that unknown, if we just stop for a second and just let ourselves be let ourselves make contact with the unknown and be impacted by it, it's literally asking us to become something, to become a kind of leader that we've never known before. It's like, that's what the moment is. If we rise to the moment, that's what will of necessity happen, is what it means to be human, what it means to be a leader, what it means to exist in a planetary civilization, is going to become something we can't even imagine quite yet. Or not. Maybe we won't. Yeah, maybe we won't make it. There's always that option.
I was just this is a crazy exchange that we're having, and I love it. I'm just thinking of what I'm going to put in the intro. It's kind of like how you have this is for children age 15 and over. What if
right. Warning.
People who are really grounded and centered in themselves. So I was listening to Barbara Marx Hubbard, who I just love that woman. I appreciate that she's passed only recently, but I love her. And she talks about this evolutionary impulse. And she talks about the prior 5 species that existed before us, and talks about a new species and the potential or possibility of us as a species becoming extinct and making way for what wants to be. And so she would use language like, this evolutionary impulse that is within every one of us is very soft and gentle, and it's a pulse sensation, and turning into it and saying yes facilitates an exchange or a co-creation is her word. You get to co-create with and through this evolutionary impulse. Of course, you can ignore it or continue and persist without it. Carl Jung, Jungian psychology would suggest that if you ignore it long enough, it's like we don't need you and it will kill you off. You'll walk in front of a bus and die. I like that I can say that now without hysterical laughing. The first time I heard that, I was like, what did you just say? But Hubbard, and I know this is an unfamiliar, I'm going to rephrase that. I know this is familiar territory for you, where we talk about, our species and what's happening to us right now and what may be our future as not being here, or evolving into a new form. Do you believe that this moment is the beginning of that trajectory for us?
Yeah, I believe that this moment is in systems theory, what is called potentially a bifurcation point, but just basically like sometimes people grow slowly over a long period of time. And then sometimes you get, even in the fossil record, you get these evolutionary leaps. And I think that's what you're talking about. Maybe that's what Barbara Marx Hubbard was referring to, is that there are times in which all of the ingredients come together and there's some potent force that we get to participate in. And I think we actually do have the ability to influence where it goes. I don't think we're powerless in this evolution. As you said, I think it's in dialogue with us. It's something that we can listen to. It's a voice inside of us. You mentioned that it was really gentle and soft. I think it is gentle and soft, and it's also fierce and impactful. And I think we can be stewards of that voice. We can somehow, we actually in some ways are the voice itself, being unfolding in each moment. And so I think this moment is special. Now, a lot of human societies and civilizations throughout time have always said that their moment is special, but the difference is we're right. Yeah.
Oh, I love you, Justin. I love you. Yeah. I've had a few conversations where I've invited people to talk about the distinction between what is instinct, what is intuition, and what is an evolutionary impulse. And it's wonderful and intellectually masturbatory all at the same time. And while I don't need to have a clear, concise opinion on all of those, I personally hold my intuition to be something that I've now copped on to and went, right, I'm going to start listening to you a little bit more. Quite separate to the evolutionary impulse with which I get to co-create with and through. But I would add something here, and I'm curious your take on it, because I'm going to say something quite different, I think, to what you said about 4 minutes ago, which is that evolutionary impulse that I turn into and say yes to, I'm in service to it. I want to co-create with it, and I want to be a vehicle of service. And now I'm using very stereotypical labels here, but I'm in service to it, it that cannot be named. I like the idea that I get to influence it. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but let's bring it back to leadership. you do some really incredible work. Actually, why don't you just take a minute or so and talk to us about the type of work that you're facilitating? You're in Vancouver at the moment. Talk to us about your company, some of their legacy, their history, and then let's start looking at leadership today. And even if it's a blueprint and a model that doesn't yet have full manifestation, let's start talking about where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm part of a very interesting, unique firm in Vancouver called Design House Collective. And it really is the, it really is the, what do you call it? The culmination of of the journey that I've been on for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, we work with leaders and organizations that are committed to transforming their industry or a market or the world. That's really the type of projects and briefs we like to take on. A lot of times the briefs that other agencies, other firms wouldn't take on, I think.
Well, I think because there's a vastness to them. There's a holding of space for what hasn't come into form, but yet will come into form. That takes a very unique personality type to say, I cannot see the outcome. I feel the intention, and I'm going to work with what I feel right now, and form will come. I don't know if I'm summarizing it accurately, but that would take a unique person. And I think for the majority of the world, I'm not going to go majority like 90%, but a significant amount of people would hear that type of brief and think they're actually fucking bonkers. Like, what is that? Because they wouldn't know what to do with it. So go on.
And so that is a lot of the work that we do is we engage leaders and work with them to literally describe into existence a future that hadn't been imagined yet, that literally didn't exist previously, but to literally, and we use different methods, but they make contact with that future. They literally start to bring it into being through language, through participation with each other, through alignment, through communication. They start to create a future that didn't exist before. And then we work backwards from that future, because once it exists, we can actually stand in that future fulfilled and work backwards from the future to this very moment to see what were the choices that we had to make in order to get to that future.
Oh, I love that language.
Yeah.
I love that language. Clarity and trajectory and bringing absolute vivid detail to the world, the project or the idea or the business that wants to exist 3 years, 5 years from now. What are the choices that we made in order to realize the outcome?
Yeah.
Really love. Yeah.
And I don't think this is incredibly groundbreaking or new. I think all the great coaches and great leaders somehow instinctively do this. We did a film with Michael Phelps and his lifelong swimming coach last year. And that's exactly how his coach works. They created a future and then they worked backwards. And that gave Michael all of his actions while he was training as a teenager. Why did he practice 365 days a year, including Christmas Day? Because when he was 11 years old, he wrote down on a piece of paper, I am going to win gold in the Olympics. That gave him his actions. His actions came from the future. And all he did was in every moment by moment by moment, he started collapsing that future into reality through his actions and through his, not just his physical actions, also his actions of what to think and how to think came from the future. So we do that work with people, and we also develop leaders to build a number of capacities which go beyond the average leader in today's society. So there are advanced capacities of leadership, which are rare in a human being, but they make individuals more effective at delivering transformation in their organizations, on their teams. They make individuals better capable of facilitating adaptation to major changes and disruption in their world, which is exactly the moment that we're living in right now. And so
if you had to describe or articulate advanced leadership capabilities, so you've got an audience of leaders listening right now who are committed to personal growth, self-actualization in the business environment. And they're listening to that going, where do I start, and what does that look like for me, and how do I develop advanced leadership capabilities? How do I know that I don't have them right now? Maybe I do.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of research. There's starting to be, I won't say a lot, but there's starting to be some research that's been done on these capacities. And back in 2013, when I was making a film on leadership in the energy industry, I had the privilege of meeting Barrett Brown, who did his PhD dissertation on what the most advanced and developed leaders, how they think, how they design, interventions, how they execute. And they are very different. There's many similarities for great leaders, but there's something different about these leaders. And so these are all leaders that have had massive impact on orchestrating change on a global level. Number one, that was the criteria. And then number two, they had to test very high on certain measures of human development. So they would be in the top 1% or higher of what is normally a standard scale of human development. Anyway, what do these leaders do? How do they think differently? What do they see, know, and do that others don't? Yeah. That was a question. And that's the question that we work with in our business a lot. So to give you some examples, I know you asked for an example. So one is, how do leaders deal with conflict? And we can kind of rank the maturity with which leaders deal with conflict on a scale, and there's different steps. So if I'm very immature as a leader, and probably no one in your audience is at this level, but a very immature way of dealing with conflict is to just simply avoid it at all costs. Or, for some people, they have a view of conflict, which is, I will barrel through and win in any situation, no matter what, nobody's going to stop me. That's a fairly immature. And
I want to add one to that.
Yeah, sure.
I know there's many, but one that I think is quite resonant. I've had 3 conversations this week about it, which is conflict arises, and the juvenile or immature leader will embrace it or approach it with the desire to control it.
Yeah, sure.
I need to be more strong, more capable. My team needs to be more strong, more capable. We've got difficult members of the team. So instead of dealing with the difficult situation on the team, I'm going to ask Justin over here to make sure that Johnny does his job properly. And so we start organizing culture around the problem so that we can control it. And so the need to control and stifle it out goes in the juvenile leadership box as well. Carry on.
Yeah. So a little bit higher than that is sort of, now this is where we start to get into, in many ways, how a very large segment of the population performs when it comes to their leadership. When they have conflict, their approach, their logic to resolving that is, okay, well, let's compromise. Let's come up with a solution where Shannon gets some of what she wants and Justin gets some of what he wants. And then nobody's really totally happy, but at least everyone got something that they want. And that's a solution to dealing with conflict. It's not a great solution to dealing with conflict, but it's better than the earlier ones that we talked about.
Yep.
Now go a little higher from that, and you'll see most managers in corporations, most probably vice presidents in corporations, and many leaders of corporations are what they're looking for is, okay, well, let's not just try to compromise, but let's see if we can somehow create some solution by talking about it where everyone's perspective is heard, and then there's some solution that we can arrive at that is like better than what we started with.
Or a compromise. It would be elevated. So it would be a collective exchange that produces an outcome that sits above the compromise solution.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Something that by the fact of the conflict, we actually arrived at something better than what we started with. So that's a pretty mature way of dealing with conflict. But it's actually not the most mature way that the most mature leaders seem to approach conflict. The really mature leaders, how do they work with conflict? Well, they're kind of looking at it as, what's the opportunity in this moment? If instead, because you mentioned earlier, they try to control it at the very, at the lower levels of maturity, but instead it's not really trying to control it. It's not even trying to resolve it. It's like, instead of trying to resolve this conflict, what if we let the conflict resolve us? Instead of trying to work it out so we get to some solution, what if we allow the conflict to work us out? And how do we want to hold this conflict? How do we want to be transformed by it? How do we want to engage with others in such that a conversation is created that literally brings things to life in us that we didn't know about before? That's a more mature way of dealing with conflict, but it's very rare, Shannon. It's very rare. And we could even go a little half step up higher than that, which is that sometimes, depending on your personality type and what this context is as for your leadership, there might be situations in which a very skillful leader has the ability to generate a bit of conflict on purpose, because they recognize that there is an evolutionary force. There's a potential when there's friction, and it's actually good for the organization. It's good for the community to have conflict. And so as a leader, I'm actually providing that. Ow.
That's ow. So why am I saying ow? One is, so that's on a few levels. So as a business leader, to be able to operate at a level or a space, any space, to be able to operate within a space that allows me to organize conflict for the higher good of my people and my organization, that I would need to stretch into a lot. That's why I'm saying ow, as in ouch. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is when the conflict kicks off and it starts to unfold and express itself, when you have multiple personality types and you're not in a position to control how people respond, react to a situation, that makes me say ouch as well. And then I think about the unknown of the complete process, and because in the space where I'd have to operate in order to do that, I'd have to have no attachment to outcome. Yeah. And I'd have to be part of a process, holding it, but not controlling it. And the outcome, would I be happy with that, or would I want? So ouch on a whole bunch of levels. I love it. I love the idea of growing into that version of leader. And I recognize and deeply value conflict. I deeply value conflict and its service and how it enables and facilitates growth. But when you're in it, I don't know about you, Justin, but I am grumpy as fuck. and I don't necessarily want to be leading people and have a responsibility or an accountability for it. I want to be able to go to the park and meditate and watch water and do what I need to do to manage my conflict. So I'm not going to say I need to stretch into it. I need to go get on a plane and find which continent that space lives in, because it's far from me at the moment. Wow.
Well, I think going to the park and meditating is never a bad idea. And in fact, I'll just make this side note, but it's so we don't know very much about what helps leaders reach the higher levels of leadership development. We don't actually know why some people seem to develop so far in their lives and other people get stuck at a certain level. But one thing that does seem to have a significant impact is that lifelong meditators seem to develop more rapidly and further along the scale. So I think
I was just having a conversation with someone. I really appreciated them sharing this science, a little bit of science behind it. So I know that we haven't even touched on your experience with meditation, but at one point in the last 5 years, weren't you doing 2 hours each morning?
Yeah, for about 6 months I did do 2 hours a day
in the morning. Then your experience with meditation has taken you to Peru?
I've spent time in Peru. I lived in South America for a few months and in Mexico for a couple months.
You speak from a place of proper experience with and about meditation. So you probably already know what I'm about to tell you. So transcendental meditation, there's many different forms of it, many different forms. TM is what I picked up in London back in 2015.
Okay.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've splintered it and I've done different things, because as I'm doing more and more in the Jungian psychology, I'm really appreciating rituals and visualization.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm mixing them, and it's extraordinary. One of the things that 30% cortisol reduction. So transcendental meditation is, if you're not familiar with it, for anyone listening, it's a mantra that you're given, typically in a small group. And then there's a 20-minute meditation in the morning and 20-minute meditation at night. That's typically the TM experience. There's no philosophy, there's no methodology, that's it. But they have been able to measure it, and they report, particularly for business owners, 30% reduction in cortisol within, and I can't remember the time frame, but I'm going to put 30 days on it, because that would be way more than what you needed. But I think they said 3 days of 20 minutes a day brings a 30% reduction in cortisol. Now, if you compare that to going to sleep at night with elevated, and cortisol is a stress hormone, when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol levels have gone down by less than, these are single digit percentages. 3%, so many variables, but hardly 30%. So meditation as a tool in a leader's toolkit, very powerful to be still inside in, I'm going to go with a meta crisis. Still and poised inside a meta crisis.
Yeah. And the ability to work with your attention skillfully, so that inside of a meta crisis, which is like a storm, right? Everything's going on. Can you be in a place where everything's going on, let everything go on, but still maintain your focus on what you want to focus on? That's a skill that meditation supports. Yeah,
absolutely.
And that speaks to another capacity. So another advanced capacity of the most developed leaders is that they actually are capable of self-generating and sustaining over long periods of time a flow state in their work. That advanced leaders are more capable and more fluid with their states of being.
And states in this particular case, I want to just unpack it a wee bit.
Yeah.
The metaphor that I use whenever I reference a state is water. When water moves from an ice to a liquid to a gas, the state at which it shifts from ice to liquid is the state change. And so it's very different than the process of boiling water, but the state at which boiling water becomes a plasma, that is a state. And so if you can, I don't know if you've got a better metaphor, Justin, but I think it's important that when we're talking about state, we're recognize that there is an equanimity that takes place within the central nervous system, the physiology, that is different to cerebral, thoughtful, willing, mentally compelling something. It's not mental. It's not cerebral. Would you agree? And do you have a better metaphor than the ice one when it comes to describing states?
Yeah. Like, I like what you said about it's not mental. If what you, I'm trying to see if what you mean is that it's a full mind body.
Yes.
Experience. Yeah.
Synthesis. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, which is rare. And I might be projecting here, but so many of us live from the neck up. And there's no connection to what's going on below the neck. And that does not facilitate a state of flow. But when you can integrate mind and body, and there's this synthesis, which I don't know, it took me 4 years just to figure out how to go from head to heart. I mean, that's 3 feet. It took me years to figure it out. But I get to play at a different level today. And I love that you've known me for 30 years and have witnessed the transformations. Oh my God, the thousands of transformations. You're allowed to laugh. There's been many. But in the synthesis of mind and body, you get to operate, or you get to find the access point to flow.
Yeah.
As opposed to force and coercion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that is another, you've just, you know, you're expressing another quality of what we could call conscious leaders or advanced leaders, is that they do have the ability, they integrate many aspects of their experience, but a common frame that people use when they're learning how to do this, that I've worked with, that I find very powerful, is head, heart, and hara. So the head.
You're going to explain hara in a minute, aren't you?
I will. So hara is a Japanese word, and it means like your gut, your belly. So I don't know if you recall the word harakiri, but it's when they used to stab themselves in the gut. The samurais would stab themselves in the gut with a sword. So that hara. Yeah. So what's really cool, and we can think about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, how she was with a scarecrow who had no brain, a tin man who had no heart, and a lion who had no courage. And so throughout our myths in society, and even through our language, we have ways of expressing how each one of these centers of energy in our body is sort of receptive to types of information. It gives us a kind of intuition. For example, when I talk about the kind of intuition that comes from my head, from my mind, I would say it's clear now. I see it. I have an insight. I have a vision of where to go, right? Like all that stuff is very much associated with the head, and it's all very useful to us. We don't want to go through life without a brain, but mostly in business, that's all we've got. Yeah. And whereas the heart it's our ability to connect with other human beings, to feel, to commune with nature, to to be in a relationship, all of that, it doesn't come from the head, it comes from the heart, and it gives us a different type of intuition. But we have the language to say, like, something doesn't feel right here, or I feel very good about, X, Y, and Z. That all that information is coming from the heart. And then, a different level of that is or a different level of the body is the hara, which is, this is your power. This is your ability to take what is rightfully yours and taste it and enjoy it. Like, all of that, it comes from your gut. And so, really, we as leaders, we don't want to be led with our mind. We want the direction we are going. We want what we are standing for. We want that to come from our heart and from our hara. And then our mind is like going to help us not trip over any sticks and make sure that we don't fall in a hole, and make sure that we, on the pathway there, our mind is going to be very useful. But it shouldn't be what's making the most important decisions about what matters in life.
Rumi has this really great expression where he talks about, make your heart your eyes and your mind your feet.
Make your heart your eyes and your mind your feet.
See with your heart.
Yeah, that's exactly
walk there with your mind. Yeah. Making sure you don't fall over the sticks. Jungian psychology, which everyone knows that I've been doing it and I'm loving it on the weekends. Jung talks about libido.
Yeah.
You'd refer to as hara and courage. He uses the word libido. And I remember my very first class in Jungian psychology was a couple years ago, and it was a libido class. And I remember being in the class for about 30 minutes going, do I know what the word libido means? Because I thought I knew before I got into class today. So I started Googling. I was like, yeah, I definitely know what it means, but what is he talking about? And libido in the Jungian world is just translated as life energy. This is your life force, the power that you create with it, the thrust in life. So very powerful. And I love the Trinity, the head, heart, hara. I love that. I love the integration and the centeredness in this, I'm going to call it your language, the advanced leadership capabilities of recognizing first and foremost that the Trinity exists, whatever label you want to give to it is fine. The desire to integrate and operate and be present from that centered space within you. To evolve and grow and develop and to become the version of leader that gets to have that 5-year manifestation, whatever you've created in the future at some future time and space, you grow into the version of you that gets to have that. The 11-year-old Michael grew into the version that got to wear the medal.
Yeah.
And you only grow into it through friction and crisis and conflict.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the time, and I'm first of all, I want to say, please come back. Second, I want to say I could go for another hour, but we're not going to today. So as I reflect on the exchange that we just had, I'm curious as to what insights or final thoughts that you have that you'd like to share with anyone listening right now.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just say a couple things about that head, heart, and hara, and then see where that goes, because I think this is a really important thing. And people might be wondering, like, okay, I think I know what this is. I know what it's like to feel something in my heart. And I know that I'm usually in my head when I'm bopping around doing stuff during the day. So in the beginning, when you're working with these 3 energy centers of the body, you might have to like toggle back and forth, like really try, like check in, like, okay, what does my heart think? Like if I talk to my heart, you can actually like, you can actually ask your hara a question and just see what feeling arises there.
Yeah, I'm testament to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can get information from your body. So in the beginning, it's kind of like, it's hard to hold all 3 at the same time. So you kind of have to toggle. You kind of got to check in with each one and then, and go back and forth. As your as you manifest as a conscious leader, as an advanced leader, the capacity that you will gain is the ability to maintain contact with all three simultaneously for long periods of time, so that your natural expression just is speaking authentically and congruently from a voice that embodies your head, heart, and hara.
Can you say that again? It is the integration of the head, heart, and hara that allows you to speak authentically. Say that again, because it totally landed with me, and I just want to slow it down, particularly.
Yeah. Okay, so it's about the presence of attention, right? If I develop the skill, and this takes some time and some work, but it's actually not that hard. If I develop the skill where I can hold my attention simultaneously in contact with my head, heart, and hara at the same time, and then if I get to the place where I can actually hold that attention like that for longer and longer periods of time without losing it, then it starts to become a natural expression where throughout life, as I'm bopping around, I'm not bopping around from my head. I'm bopping around as this authentic, coherent, integrated voice of my being.
Wow.
Yeah. And, in meditation, people talk about witness consciousness, right? So and that's like an insight people have at the beginning of their meditation where they can just witness everything. They witness all the thoughts, and it's like there's an ability to notice where the witness is. But it's like when you get that embodied form of leadership, it's like you're witnessing it, but you're literally like witnessing it from the inside out. So you're like literally you're not separate from it. You become it. And you witness it from the inside out.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the one thing I would say, to your listeners is, for the vast majority of human beings, there's a level of skill. There's a level of navigating in the world. There's a level of creation and, leadership, really leadership, that for most of us, we've barely even begun to imagine what that could be. We barely even tasted it. But trust me, it's a very creative place to operate from. And so I would encourage your listeners to take that on, take some of these practices on, begin to explore, begin to even just hold tensions between certainty and uncertainty. We live in this world where there's a ton of uncertainty right now. So can I hold the tension of the uncertainty in tension with the certainty of my life and not try to work it out, not try to resolve it, but just let that tension move me, inform me. Those types of practices, they literally do transform people over time. And it's not like they're just like a more interesting person. It's like they're a more impactful, more potent, more fertile, more transformative person. And so if that's what your listeners are looking for, I just want to encourage them that is available to them.
I am so grateful that you came on the show today. I want to thank you for being here. This has been a great exchange, and in front of everybody live, I'm going to ask you, are you coming back to talk to me again next month?
I'd love to. I would. Yeah, let's do this again sometime. Yeah, absolutely.
I love you. Thank you.
I love you too, Shannon.
The Work That Matters podcast, it's brought to you by ShannonEastman.com.